me now is the ring announcer for Queensberry. He's the Riyadh season and the ring boxing events. That's Thomas Treiber. Thomas, appreciate taking time to come on today.
Well, Zach, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, Thomas, you have quite the resume. You have quite the story to get to this point. I know all boxing fans know you. And the reason I wanted to have you on here, too, is because I've had on boxers, I've had on trainers, I've had on coaches, I've had on managers, promoters, but we've yet to have the ring announcer on yet. So you're the very first one. So appreciate you taking time to come on today.
Well, I'm honored.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into this because, as I said, you have quite the story, and I want to get into your story and I want people to get to know who Thomas Treiber is outside of this job that we see every day and how you got to this place. So I want to go all the way back, though. You grew up in Chicago, and you were wrestling and boxing a little bit, announcing on those things, and also you were training for bodybuilding. So I want to just get to the story. Like, what were you like growing up, and what was it like kind of pursuing this avenue that you now got into?
Well, I grew up just outside the city of Chicago, and I was always interested in sports. When I was around 12, 13, I became a huge professional wrestling fan. So I really, really started to follow professional wrestling. And then I got interested in bodybuilding also at a young age. I was about 14 years old when I joined a gym and started to get interested in bodybuilding. I eventually competed in bodybuilding as a teenager, which was a great experience. And I think it gave me the opportunity to learn about discipline and so forth. And the ring announcing started when I was 17. I was a senior in high school. A good friend of mine, he was a boxer. His brother was a boxer. And that's where the light bulb went off. And I said, wow, I would like to try ring announcing. And as they say, the rest is history.
Now, we got to go into a couple of those parts right there. First of all, bodybuilding. That had to be something that obviously is not what everybody's part of the story is about. You got into bodybuilding. What was the inspiration behind that? Why did you find so much joy in that?
I was one of those very, very thin kids. And,
Okay.
I remember seeing bodybuilding magazines. And then there was a movie called Pumping Iron with
Hmm.
Arnold Schwarzenegger, Lou
Okay.
Ferrigno, Franco Columbu. And it was a movie from the 70s. It was a documentary on, I believe it was the 76 Olympia.
Mhm.
And that really sparked my interest in bodybuilding. So, joined a local gym with a very good friend of mine. He and I just fell in love with it, and I wanted to see my body change, and thankfully I had genetics for bodybuilding, and
Mhm.
just took it as far as I could.
Is that something that you also enjoy the working output component? Like, has that been something you kind of kept in your resume and kind of part of your career going forward now?
Yeah, I mean, I always loved sports. I started
Mhm.
playing Little League Baseball when I was four,
Okay.
5 years old, and played soccer. Um, did track and field and things like that. But once I started high school, bodybuilding was all I wanted to do. So I stopped
Okay.
playing organized sports and just did the bodybuilding. And now at the age of 51, almost 52
Mhm.
next month, I just try to stay fit now. No
Yeah.
interest in
Yeah.
stepping on a stage. Nobody wants to see me on a stage anymore.
Okay. Absolutely. So the other component you said, so you're 17 years old, you start this record of becoming a ring announcer. If I were to talk to young Thomas all the way back there and I said you would become the person that so many people look at the biggest boxing fights every year, and there you are announcing the fight, would that have been something that was shocking to you? Was that just something that was in the back of your mind as a dream? Or is that something that you never would even believed? Or was this exactly how did everything happen exactly as you had planned?
I had no visions of becoming a ring announcer on an international scale. For me, it was just I was interested in broadcasting. When I was
Okay.
finishing high school, I was looking into colleges and I saw broadcasting, radio, maybe news. I wasn't even quite sure what I wanted to do behind a microphone. But as I mentioned, when I saw my friend who was a boxer, it just clicked. I said, wow, that's something I would like to try and do. And being that I was a big pro wrestling fan, I was
Mhm.
already familiar with a few ring announcers, especially Howard Finkel, who was the
Okay.
voice of the World Wrestling Federation for many years. So I pretty much just went in there and tried to impersonate Howard Finkel, from watching wrestling all those years. But I never could have imagined it would have turned into a career. And it
Mhm.
certainly didn't happen overnight either.
When did it start to click for you? You said, you know what? I feel like this could be something that I could actually have a very successful career in. When did that happen?
Well, I started in 1991 when I was
Hmm.
17 years old. And then in 92, 93, I became a professional wrestler
Right.
because of my connections in the wrestling business as a ring announcer and because of my bodybuilding background. That opportunity was there for me to train and actually become a professional
Hmm.
wrestler. So for a couple of years, I really put most of my attention to the wrestling, but I never stopped ring announcing. I still kept doing events locally and things like that. But in regards to ring announcing and knowing that this could be a career, it was in the mid 90s that I got my first gig on national television on ESPN The Deuce. And
Hmm.
that's when ESPN was expanding and they created ESPN The Deuce, which then became ESPN2.
Okay.
And that gave me a platform to ring announce on national television. And that's where I really started to focus 100% on the ring announcing and moved away from the wrestling end.
So at that point in time, then, would you have expected that you would become one of the biggest faces of all ring announcers at that point, or is that so shocking to you at that point?
Well, I'm still waiting for that to happen, Zach. I appreciate that. No, no. Look, I mean, I'm very thankful for the opportunities I'm getting. I've never imagined that I would be working in Saudi Arabia on a regular
Right.
basis, the UK on a monthly basis. So it's really an honor. I always say this as a ring announcer, Zach. There's no bigger honor than to be flown to another country to ring
Mhm.
announce because there are plenty of very good qualified ring announcers in the UK. So I never take that for granted, but I really gave it 100%. One thing about me is when I do something, I want to give it my all.
Love it.
So I just wanted to take the ring announcing as far as I could. And now to be working side by side with Michael Buffer on all the
Mhm.
Riyadh season events and now the ring events as well, it is truly an honor and dream come true.
You said that you're not even at the level you maybe could be at one day. Like, what do you see yourself in the future now? Obviously, you're still going to do this for many, many, many more years if you so choose to. What levels do you see yourself possibly reaching?
Well, I mean, I just want to continue. You know, you never stop learning, you never stop improving. And I
Mm,
just want to keep doing it and see where it goes.
right.
Like I said, I'm very fortunate to be in the position I am in right now. I've been part of many great events, especially over the last, I've been with Queensberry for almost 8 years.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, but we started with um, the shows with Saudi Arabia about a year and a half ago, about 18 months ago. And that has just taken things to another level with
Hmm.
the events that I've been part of. Big, big productions, big undisputed world title events, and things like that. So I just want to keep doing what I'm doing. I try my best every opportunity I get and just see what the future holds.
You said something crazy that you said that you're going to keep on learning. I think that's obviously a part of life right there. But people look at you and say, "I think you're doing pretty good out there. You obviously have made yourself very successful. You sound great." But you say you continue to learn at each step. How do you learn? Like, what's for example, let's say over the past 4 or 5 months, what are some things you've learned and improved on?
Well, as a ring announcer, there's so many different elements to it.
Okay.
You want to do your best to memorize your lines. You want to
Sure.
have, smooth delivery. You want to add excitement to the introductions. But when you add that excitement, the key is that people can understand what you're saying.
Hmm.
I've seen some ring announcers make the mistake where they use their voice in a very strong way, but it gets to a point to where you can't really understand what they're saying. So I think the magic of ring announcing is to bring excitement, but for it to be your voice at just another level to add excitement. But everybody can understand everything you're saying and things like that. But um, I'm just always trying to, I'll watch some of my work and think, you know what, I could have done that a little bit better, or maybe I'll
Mm.
add a word here or a word there. So just making little tweaks here and there, just trying to always do better.
Your voice has become a voice that people recognize in all the boxing world now. How about that voice though? Because obviously, to become a ring announcer, you have to have a signature voice, a signature style. When did you start to really deliver and kind of figure out, okay, this is my style, this is the way I'm going to do it? Like your branding, I think is probably the proper word for that. When did that start to come to fruition for yourself?
Well, that's a good question, Zach. I mean, when you become a ring announcer, it takes time. And
Right.
whenever I have other ring announcers, especially aspiring ring announcers, reach out to me, I always tell them do as many shows as you can. And because getting comfortable inside the ring is so important, especially when you start working at a high level where you have a worldwide audience or you're on live on television. You want to feel as comfortable and confident as you possibly can. But
Mhm.
I think the key thing to focus on is good pronunciation, whether a fighter is from Chicago or they're from China. You want to
Right.
say their name, their hometown, their country as close to the natives of that country pronounce it. So
Mhm.
you do your homework. I try and talk with each fighter at every event to make sure I get the pronunciation of exactly how they want me to say their name, hometown, nickname, whatever it may be. But use your own voice. I think it's very important to use your own voice and not try to impersonate anyone. You
Yeah.
never want to go in there and sound like you're trying to be Michael Buffer or Jimmy Lennon Jr. And so I think it's important to try and hone your own style and use your own
Mhm.
voice.
I have to ask though, before you've ever gone into a fight, do you ever get nervous? Is there ever nerves that come with it, or how do you deal with that?
You see that? This is
Yep.
my TV hand. No, I'm
Okay.
just kidding. No, I mean, of course, we all can feel nervous at times, but I think the key thing is, like I said, experience makes you more comfortable. I think with any
Right.
job, the longer you do a job, the more confident you're going to become, the more comfortable you're going to become. But certainly when you do a big event like when we did Anthony Joshua versus Daniel Dubois at Wembley Stadium this past summer, we had over 90,000 fans. And
Yep.
even though I didn't do the main event that night, I did the co-main when there was already over 90,000 people in the
Mhm.
stadium and a worldwide audience.
Yeah.
And you really just block it out. I mean, I'm so focused on what I'm doing, I
Mhm.
try to block it out. Even a few weeks ago, we were in London at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. We did the Chris Eubank Jr. versus Connor Ben event where we had close to 70,000 fans there at that stadium. And,
Okay.
but I feed off that. I call it more adrenaline and excitement rather than
Mm.
nerves. I think you
Okay.
feed off the crowd sometimes and it shows in your performance. So I try to use a big audience, to my advantage.
I know you said you always want to learn. You make improvements over your career. If you were to go back and you were to say there's one time that you remember at the back of your mind that really stands out to you that you messed up on, that you feel like if you could get one moment back, you'd want to redo that moment. What is that moment for you?
That would be being on your show, Zach.
All
That
right.
would be the one. No, no, actually, I made my mistakes, and
Mhm.
unfortunately, I made a mistake on national television. On
Mm.
ESPN, I mentioned that I got my first break on national TV with ESPN The Deuce. Well, I was only on my second show, and we were in Johnson City, Tennessee, and I made a rookie mistake. I left my note card ringside. The fight
Mhm.
stopped. It was a stoppage, TKO. I go inside the ring. I've got my microphone. I go over to get the time from the timekeeper. And it's at that moment that I'm realizing, wait a minute, I don't have my card with me. And as I turn around, the floor director's pointing at me, go, go, go. And I felt the pressure because we're on live television. And I'm
Mhm.
like, well, I guess I'm just going to have to wing it without my card. So as I'm saying, the official time, 2 minutes, 25 seconds of round number two, your winner by technical knockout. And I'm realizing I don't know the fighter's name. I mean, I'm literally, and and just as I was saying, your winner by technical knockout, I said, "What's your name?" to the fighter because he was right next to me. But I
Yeah.
made a mistake. The microphone was still by my mouth. So everybody heard me say, "What's your name?" And I mean, the crowd bursted into laughter. This thing went viral before things went viral. It ended up
Right.
on newscast. I don't know if you're pretty young. I don't know if you remember the David Letterman show,
I do
but
remember that. Yep.
it ended up on David Letterman. They showed it as a blooper. I thought my career was over, Zach. I thought that
Right.
was it. I was going to retire from ring announcing and get a job at an oil refinery. But no, I got a call from the promoter maybe a week or two after, he said, "Look, you're going to do the next show. Brush it off. Forget about it. Let's focus on the next event." That's what I did.
Mm.
It was the best advice I ever got. And thankfully, here I am 30 years later, still doing this.
I think that's a huge testament to just life in general, because you're going to make mistakes, you're going to mess up, and things are going to happen. And as you said, at that point, I'm sure it's embarrassing. I'm sure at that point you said you didn't know if your career was going to be over at that moment. But yet, obviously, that's not the story for yourself. So when you talk about that, just being able to learn from that opportunity, obviously still having a promoter had grace and being saying, okay, you know what, you're going to be all right, we'll let you come back again. But when you talk about learning from that, not just getting too down on yourself long term, I'm sure at the moment, but how did you just bounce back from that confidence-wise going forward then?
It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy.
Right.
It added to my nerves. I was very nervous. I was
Mm,
frightened of making another mistake. But I
sure.
think that helped me because you learn from your mistakes. And I will tell you, I never forgot my card ringside ever again. I when I got in that ring, I was squeezing that no card. So the key in life, we're all humans. We're all going to make
Right.
mistakes. But the key is to learn from your mistake and try and become better.
Absolutely. Well, I want to go back into your story a little bit more, because I know we kind of got talking to a little bit moving forward now, but you also were a part of wrestling, as you just talked about. And I got to ask you more about that, because you're wrestling against stars like Steve Austin, Rick Rude, Brian Pillman. That had to be quite a sensational part of your life too. So break down that part of your life a little bit.
Well, as I said, I started ring announcing at 17. And when I started ring announcing, I was ring announcing both boxing and professional wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
And as I mentioned when we started the show, I was a huge pro wrestling fan. So obviously, for me, it was always, a dream to maybe even try wrestling at some point. And
Okay.
the timing and the opportunity was there right after I competed in a bodybuilding competition at 19. I had the opportunity to train, become a professional wrestler, wrestled mostly on the independent wrestling circuit, which are small events and mostly throughout the
Sure.
Chicago area. But I got very lucky. There was a World Championship Wrestling WCW talent scout at one of the shows I wrestled on. It was in St. Louis, Missouri. And he said, "Look, we like your look. We'd like to bring you and put you on television." And at the time, WCW, World Championship Wrestling, they were the number 2 company under the WWF, which is now the WWE. So this is a
Right.
pretty big deal for a 19-year-old kid to go wrestle on national television with WCW. And I had wonderful opportunities. I wrestled Stone Cold Steve Austin, who at the time was stunning Steve Austin, Flying
Mm-hmm.
Brian Pillman, ravishing Rick Rude, who was a huge professional wrestling star, a tag team called the Awesome Kongs, a guy named the Equalizer. So I had an opportunity to wrestle at a level I never thought I would get a chance to wrestle
Mm-hmm.
at. And it happened so fast for me. But deep down, I always knew the announcing was my first love. And that's what I
Okay.
really, really wanted to pursue. So after a couple of years of wrestling, and by the way, I was enhancement talent, I was a jobber, I was a guy that they would bring in. This is for WCW. I was the guy they would
Mm-hmm.
bring in to lose. I was never the
Okay.
guy winning the match. I was always the
Okay.
guy losing the match. And I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
under contract, but they were using me and putting me on television. And as a 19-year-old kid who was a huge pro wrestling fan, it was truly a dream come true. But it was in 94 that I decided that's it. I want to go
Mm-hmm.
100% with the ring announcing, and haven't looked back since.
If I were to ask you your favorite memory and your worst memory from wrestling, what would those answers be?
Well, probably my worst memory would be I was wrestling a guy named the Equalizer,
Okay.
and he did what's called a choke slam, and that's where you lift a guy up by his throat, straight
Mm.
up off his feet, and then you drop him flat on his back. Well, in this situation, I jumped up for him as you're supposed to. You're supposed to jump
Mm-hmm.
up for your opponent because they're not going to really lift you by your neck. So
Yeah.
I jumped up for him, and what he did, he shoved me. He shoved me midair, and instead of landing flat on my back, I landed on the back of my head.
Mm.
And I strained my neck, but I wasn't seriously injured. I was actually back wrestling a week later.
Okay.
But it was a scary moment. It was a scary moment. That is on the internet. Someone posted it not too long ago, and it's pretty gruesome. the way
Mm.
I landed on the back of my head because it was on television, and this is with
Hmm.
WCW.
Okay.
So it's out there. It's out there. And but thankfully, I was not seriously injured because professional wrestling, although it is choreographed, guys really do get hurt. You're not
Yeah.
in there to hurt your opponent, but accidents happen.
Mm.
And in this case, thankfully, I wasn't seriously injured. And he, and the guy who did it, he apologized, and it was a mistake. I don't blame him.
Right.
No hard feelings or anything like that. But things like that happen. So thankfully, I didn't break my neck, and I was able to, like I said, a week later.
Awesome. And then the other side of that, what would be your best story you've ever had from your wrestling career?
Oh, wow. One of the things I loved about wrestling, being in the wrestling business, is the camaraderie that you have with the other
Hmm.
wrestlers.
Okay.
You spend a lot of time in the cars together, traveling from event to event and things like that. You go to the gym together. You're in the locker rooms together, and a lot of the guys rib each other, make fun of each other. It's just a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, and I think one of the things I cherished the most from being a professional wrestler when I was the camaraderie that I had with other wrestlers. It was just a lot of fun.
I think you talked about something kind of unique there, and that's the fact that obviously you were going to this point and you said always back in the back of your mind, your heart, you knew that your career was to be ring announcing. And so I have to ask you that if you were to go directly to that moment, can you pinpoint the moment that you decide, you know what, thing's not for me, I'm going to move on from this and I want to go pursue ring announcing? What was that moment and what led to that decision?
I don't think it was something that actually happened in one day or one moment. I think it was just kind of over the course of time. I was losing interest in wrestling,
Okay.
and my opportunities with the ring announcing were getting bigger and bigger. And I
Gotcha.
kind of started to, gravitate away from wrestling. But certainly when I started ring announcing national TV and I had the opportunity to start working events on ESPN, that's where I really lost all interest in pursuing the professional wrestling
Mhm.
anymore.
And as you go through this journey, I mean, you work for different people, Top Rank, ESPN, Fox Sports Net, Network, USA Network, HBO. Like this is a long list of climbing your way all the way to the point where you're at today. And I feel like it's been a long journey, as you said. It's been a lot of ups and downs, bumps, roads, whatever it's been to get to where you're at today. When you look back throughout your journey, outside of that one blooper moment you had, was there a moment that you kind of looked at and said, okay, this maybe isn't going as planned. This is not, I'm not where I want to be yet. Was there ever tough moments like that throughout your career?
Absolutely. There was,
Okay.
I've been in this business for a little over 3 decades, and there's been a
Yeah.
lot of ups and downs, a lot of peaks and valleys, as they say. And there were certainly some lean years where the phone wasn't ringing like I wanted it to ring, and started to think about maybe getting another job or moving into another career path.
Mhm.
But when you really love something, it's really, really hard to walk away from it. And the passion never ended for me. I was always very passionate about it. And I think that's what got me through the lean years and the tough times. But certainly, whenever you're involved in anything with television, there's a lot of things out of your control. You might end up on
Mhm.
a boxing series, but the network decides to pull the plug on it. So it's not always about your performance. There's a lot of things sometimes that are out of your control. So the best advice I ever give anyone is just do the very best job you can with every opportunity you get, and just let the cards fall where they do.
What would you say was the toughest time span? Like you said, there were some dry years or whatever. What was the moment you pinpoint back looking at it and say, you know what, that was tough. It's kind of crazy that I got through that point.
Well, in the late 90s, I ended up on a series with Fox Sports Net, and that was from
Okay.
97 to around 2000. And when that series ended for me, I was a bit lost because
Mhm.
at that time, if you weren't on HBO or you weren't on Showtime, there wasn't a lot in between. So
Right.
here I had this wonderful run where I was under contract with Fox Sports Net and a company called America Presents. And I was working 2, 3 shows a month on national TV, 2, 3 times a month. And then it just comes to a screeching halt.
Mhm.
And as a ring announcer, I was certainly able to get work with smaller events and things like that, but the money did not compare to what I was making with the Fox series, and the exposure didn't compare to the exposure of being on national TV. So I had about a year or two where I really was trying to figure things out. I had also just turned 30 years old, and I was just trying to find myself. So I explored some different career avenues, but never quit ring announcing. And thankfully, the phone started to ring again, and I ended up working events on national TV again on a regular basis. So I'm just glad I stuck with it, and I'm glad that the phone kept ringing.
For those that aren't familiar with the business side of being a ring announcer, like you keep talking about the phone ringing. Is that something that kind of works? Kind of break us down for us. I know some people know, athletes have contracts, they have this many fights, whatever it might be. When you're talking about the business side of ring announcing for yourself, is this something where you outline a couple months out? Is this a couple weeks out before and you just have you're gonna fight, you're gonna ring announce for this fight? How does that whole process work?
Well, I mean, as a ring announcer, you're typically hired by promoters.
Okay.
And so the promoters are your clients. So obviously, the more promoters you work for, the more events you're going to do. Or maybe you have a client like right now, for the past 8 years, I've been with Queensberry out of
Mm-hmm.
England, Frank Warren, Hall of Fame promoter. And they have a contract now with DAZN. So all of our shows air on DAZN. Just before we did this deal that started April 1st, we were on a network called TNT Sports.
Mm-hmm.
And right before it was TNT, it was BT Sport. So I'm in a good position where I work for a company that does a lot of shows. So they're my number one client. So no matter
Okay.
who calls me, if I'm booked with Queensberry, that's it. That's
Mm-hmm.
who I'm working for on
Okay.
that date. But I try to stay as busy as possible. There are some other great promoters throughout the world that I work for that keep me busy when I'm not doing a Queensberry event. And
Mm-hmm.
then also now with um, the Riyadh season events that we've been doing in Saudi Arabia, that has been a great addition to my schedule. Uh, but during those lean years or waiting for the phone to ring, that would have been a period of time in my career where I didn't have that client who was using me for 20,
Okay.
30, 40 shows a year. So you're just hoping that phone rings so you could, work as many weekends out of the month as you can.
Traveling has to be a little bit chaotic. I'm sure you also love it at the same time because just following, I know we've followed each other on LinkedIn for a little while now. You're always, you're going to Saudi Arabia one week and you're going to the UK the next week and you're going all over the world and you're living obviously out in the United States. That's a lot of traveling hours you rack up. How do you adjust to the traveling lifestyle?
It is a lifestyle that you have to adjust to, and it's something you have to enjoy. If you don't like traveling, well, ring announcing would probably not be the career for you.
Right.
So I've always loved traveling. I've always loved performing, and getting an opportunity to travel has been a big plus. I've been to places I never thought that I would ever go or visit. Like I mentioned earlier, Saudi Arabia. I never thought I'd be in the country of Saudi Arabia, let alone
Right.
wearing a tuxedo, holding a microphone inside of a boxing ring. So, but it can be challenging, certainly on family life or your sleep schedule. I've been
Right.
home now for about a week. I actually just got back from a 28-day international trip. It was
Wow.
in Saudi Arabia for 1 week for the WBC Grand Prix. Then I went to
Mhm.
London for the Conor Benn versus Eubank Jr. event. Then I went
Okay.
back to Saudi Arabia for the Canelo Alvarez Williams School fight week. Then I went back to England for a DAZN show that we just had with Anthony Kakachi.
Hmm.
And it was, a crazy 28 days. So I've been home for about a week now, just trying to catch up on my sleep. Um, the time zone difference is difficult from where I
Right.
live. Saudi Arabia is 9 hours ahead of Texas. England is 6 hours ahead. So it's just something you learn to deal with, and it could definitely be challenging.
I think balance is always a huge part. Like you said, this time you've had a little bit over a week now to recoup. I know you said we talked before you're going to head to Scotland now in a couple of days, but
Yeah.
is that something when you map out your timeline? It's kind of like, okay, I need to make sure I give myself at least a week here or there to make sure I can recover and stay healthy, keep a good balance.
Absolutely. I look at my schedule and I think, wow, I've got 3 days off there. I could get my tux and clothes over to the cleaners. I can, get what I need for the next trip, try and
Hmm.
catch up on my sleep, things like that. So I definitely look when I did a show this past Saturday, but it was in San Antonio, Texas. So I
Okay.
didn't need to get on an airplane. I didn't need to stay at a hotel,
Right.
which was nice to squeeze in a show like that in between, you know, events out in the UK.
Mhm.
But yeah, you definitely just do your best to make the most out of your time when you're home.
I also want to get back into your journey because you talk about just, I think one of the biggest things you had in 2008 was a card featuring both Carl Franch and Fury's pro debut. Walk us that, because that was obviously had to be a big experience for yourself going to Nottingham, England. What was that like?
Well, that was my first ever event in the UK, in
Oh,
England.
wow.
I'll never forget, I was still in the Chicago area, got a phone call midweek, and they said, "Can you be on a plane tomorrow to England?" And I was like, holy cow, I had never thought that I would ever work in England, let alone be getting on a plane within 24 hours.
Right.
And that will always be a great memory for me. The event was in Nottingham, England. The venue at the time was called the Trent FM Arena. The main event was Carl Froch, the Cobra he's known as. He had a great career. He
Hmm.
was fighting Jean Pascal, and they were fighting for the vacant WBC super middleweight world title. Carl won the fight. It was his first world title. He was from Nottingham, so the crowd went absolutely berserk. That was the first time I realized, Zach, wow, the fans here in the UK are very special. They show a lot of enthusiasm. You see it with the soccer games or football, as they call it there, and
Yeah.
they always get mad when I call it soccer. But they really embrace sports and they really embrace boxing. And also on that card, and by the way, that was December of 2008, a fighter by the name of Tyson Fury made his pro debut in our
Hmm.
opening TV fight. So Fury's pro debut, Carl Froch's first world title fight. What a magical night it was.
I think you said something unique there. And I think when you look at the fan bases in the UK, I think Japan's right up there as well. They have an incredible fan base. I think Mexico too. Like our countries obviously value boxing probably a little bit more than US does. I know we're much more of a legitimate football country. I think basketball probably in front of boxing as well. But when you talk about that, is there a noticeable difference in the atmosphere when you go announce in the UK as opposed to America?
Absolutely. And
Hmm.
look, I mean, there are great, great boxing fans here in the United
Right.
States. But in the UK, they really, really show their enthusiasm, their love for the sport. And for example, if a fighter is a British champion, not even a world champion, they still get treated like they're a world champion. The fans
Yeah.
still embrace them like they're a world champion. And that's no disrespect to being a British champion. It's a very respectable title for any
Sure.
fighter from Great Britain, but you can really, really feel the difference. And I just love working shows there as a ring announcer. Again, like I said earlier, sometimes you feed off the energy of the crowd, and it just makes it that much more exciting for me as a ring announcer.
I also want to ask about the Queensberry deal because as you talk about, that's your number one client now. We see you always on the Queensberry cards. How did that relationship come to be with Frank Warren?
Well, it was in September of 2017 that I was contacted by Queensberry. They had just started a series with BT Sport. That was the network that they had a TV deal with at the time, and they really wanted to have one ring announcer to be the face of Queensberry and the face of this new series. And I had a few relationships with people involved with Queensberry, and thankfully my name was brought up and they contacted me and we worked out a deal, and it's been a wonderful 8 years from doing shows at arenas to stadiums, now working in Saudi Arabia, and they're a great company to work for. Frank Warren, of course, a Hall of Fame promoter and a great person, more importantly.
We've also talked a lot about Riyadh's season. Obviously, it's become one of the biggest, most talking points that you had in boxing now, and you're a part of that now. I think that's what, like you said, it's really helped take your game to the next level, your brand, and those things. How did that come to be?
Well, because Queensberry had Tyson Fury, and
Hmm.
Saudi Arabia wanted to have Tyson Fury fight in Saudi Arabia. So the first event we did was Tyson Fury versus Francis Ngannou,
Right.
the former UFC heavyweight champion.
Mhm.
And because they wanted Fury and he was with Queensberry and also Bob Arum's Top Rank, they had uh, they both promoted Tyson Fury. But Frank got the deal to stage this event with Saudi Arabia and do the event in Riyadh. And thankfully, because of my relationship with Queensberry, it opened that door of opportunity for me to
Mhm.
work that event. They did bring in Michael Buffer to do the main event, but I got to host the grand arrivals, the media workouts, the press conference, all fight week build up, and do the full undercard, even the co-main event. So it's a
Mhm.
little more than just being an undercard ring announcer, even though you're not doing the main event. So that's what opened that window of opportunity for me. And as we've done more and more events in Saudi Arabia, we've also done events in Los Angeles and in London with Saudi Arabia. They wanted to keep the continuity of me and Michael
Mhm.
because they just don't want to be flip-flopping ring announcers. So thankfully they've been happy with my work, and they've wanted to keep it me and Michael Buffer representing the Riyadh season brand, if you will.
They do things a lot different. I know you obviously see things like, the open workouts are pretty much for any fight week and stuff like that, press conferences, but theirs is really taking another level. I mean, we talk about what they did in LA, talk about what they do in London. Like, they do different massive venues. It's a big TV production around each and every single event and the build up to the fight. When you talk about being able to be a part of that, how unique is it and how special is it being a part of Riyadh season or even now, obviously, the ring cards?
It's absolutely incredible. I mean, the productions are top notch,
Yeah.
from the stages to the sound systems, everything with these Riyadh season events and the ring events are just done at the highest level. So, as a ring announcer, to get to be part of these big time productions, it's really a dream come true. And just look forward every time we finish one of them. I just can't wait until the next one.
You've also talked about Michael Buffer, obviously an all-time great, a legend of the sport. When you talk about just getting to be able to learn from him and take things from him, I'm sure you've asked him so many questions, and just been able to soak in information and wisdom from him. How big of an influence has he now had on your life?
Oh, big time. I've known Michael for over 20 years,
Okay.
but it used to be where when I would do undercards for HBO, I would do maybe the first two fights and they'd just be 4 round fights. And he would come in and do, the 4 fights or whatever live on HBO. So we had minimal interaction ringside. And he's always
Gotcha.
been very kind to me, always been a gentleman to me. But working these events in Saudi Arabia, we've spent a lot more quality time with each other because you have to be there for a full week.
Hmm.
So it's given me the opportunity to get to know Michael on a more personal level, and to be working with him on these events has been a very valuable experience. And he's just a great guy, one of the funniest people you'll ever meet
Okay.
in your life as well. People would probably be surprised at how hilarious he
Really?
is. I mean, he could have been a stand-up comedian. So,
Really?
oh, he's hilarious. So we really, it's been a lot of fun to not only learn but have a lot of fun with the best to ever do it. I mean, come on,
Mm,
who doesn't know who Michael Buffer is?
right. Yep. What would you say has been the biggest lesson that you've learned from him?
Wow, that's a good question. There's been a lot of little things that he's pointed out to me that make a big difference. I'll tell you one thing is in regards to performing. He'll be backstage watching me do the undercards because usually in his dressing room they'll have a TV inside there, and he
Okay.
had noticed that I was holding the mic a bit high. And when you hold
Mm,
the mic high, you're covering a good part of your face.
okay.
And I remember he had texted me while we were doing the pay per view, lower the mic, you know. And that's a habit that I created because when you work events with a sound system, it's not a great sound system. And you would know this, Zach, as a man
Hmm.
who works behind a microphone. You have a tendency to want to really put that mic close to your mouth because
Yep.
you feel like you have to have it really close to your mouth. when you're working with these incredible sound systems, you really don't have to put that mic right to your mouth. You can just put it
Gotcha.
right under your chin, and you're going to get this beautiful sound quality. So it was just a bad habit that I had, you know, started doing throughout the years, and
Mhm.
I lowered the mic, and that was something that I'll forever will never forget. That Michael Buffer is the one that told me I need to hold that mic lower, put it under your chin, don't cover your face. So little things like that.
You also said that he's one of the funniest people you've ever been around, which I think is a little bit surprising to people that hear that. So I have to ask you then, what's the funniest story you have with Michael Buffer?
Oh man, he does a lot of impersonations. He does a lot of different voices and things like that. So we seem to have a lot of same humor, if you will.
Okay.
He's a real jokester. Just a few weeks, the last show when we did the Canelo event, we both used the same pen. We both,
Okay.
it's a really good pen to use for our cards. So he
Okay.
was the one that recommended I buy these pens on Amazon. And when we were doing the Canelo event, I had already been on the road for like 2.5, 3 weeks, and the pen I had was running out of ink. And I knew he
Mhm.
had a few of them, because we use the same pen. So I asked him,
Mhm.
I say, Michael, can I borrow one of your pens?
Mhm.
Mine's running out of ink, and I want to continue using it. So he said, well, meet me in the hallway, by the elevator. So I went up, and as soon as I stepped out of the elevator at the hallway, he had the pen, and he was acting like it was stuck in his neck, and he was going, I mean, and then he pulled it out and gave me the pen. I was like, who would think Michael Buffer would be pretending that there was a pen stuck in his neck?
That's
And
hilarious.
so I just little things like that are just he could be quite a jokester, man.
I love it. Well, Thomas, I've got one of the final things I want to wrap up with you is 10 rapid fire questions. Now, some of them I might on the very end follow up with you, but for now, I'm just going to give quick answers for each one of these. It's going to be 10 quick questions for you. So let's get right to it. The first one, what is the favorite fight you've ever been the ring announcer for?
Who? I'd have to go back to Nottingham. Carl Fry versus
Mm.
John Pascal. My first show in the UK, England,
Your favorite venue to ring announce in?
Wembley Stadium,
Mm. The dream venue to ring announce that you have not been at yet?
Madison Square Garden, New York. I've worked Madison Square Garden Theater, but
Okay.
I have not worked in the arena.
The best city that you've ever been to for ring announcing?
Oh my goodness. I'm going to go with London. Like I said,
All
the
right.
UK fans are spectacular.
The greatest of all time ring announcer?
Michael Buffer, come on, hands down. And look, Jimmy Lennon Jr. and if you
Right.
go the wrestling end, Howard Finkel, these
Yep.
guys are all legends as well.
The best atmosphere you've ever been to ring announce at?
Well, over 90,000 fans at Wembley Stadium for Anthony Joshua versus Dubois. That's a moment I'll never forget.
If you could pick one fight that you could put together that you could ring announce for, what would it be?
Say that one more time. I'm sorry.
Oh, good. If you could pick one fight, a dream fight to make up for yourself right now that you could go ring announce for, what would it be?
Oh my goodness. I would say Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua.
All right. Your favorite fighter to announce for?
Right now, currently, my favorite fighter, I'll tell you right now, he's the featherweight world champion, Nick, the
Okay.
Wrecking Ball. Just love
hmm
that kid, love his style, and I love saying his name inside the ring.
Your favorite card that you ever announced for, top to bottom?
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but that Wembley Stadium show for me with over
Yep.
90,000 fans was just truly something extra special.
And the 10th one, the most shocking scorecard you've ever read?
Oh my goodness. Wow. There's been quite a few. Oh gosh. Let's see. You put me on the spot here, Zach. I'm trying to think right now what would be there was one not too long ago. Oh man, I can't pinpoint exactly one right now. There's been quite a few that have really shocked me.
Absolutely. Well, I want to follow up on a couple of those. One of which is you said the favorite fighter to announce for is Nick Ball. And I think that's something unique. I think we've seen a couple different ring announcers talk about the fact that, you have certain interactions with certain athletes, certain fighters. When you talk about that, I think you kind of a little bit hinted at that with Nick Ball. When you talk about just being able to kind of grow a relationship with these fighters, talking to them, announcing for them, what is that bond like?
It's great. These fighters, first of all, they're putting their lives on the line. I know
Right.
sometimes they get paid a lot of money, but boy, I mean, it's a tough sport. It's a tough sport. So whenever I get an opportunity to get to know a fighter a little bit on a personal level, it makes it a lot more fun and exciting when you get to see them, watch them box.
Right.
So I've met a lot of, and there are a lot of great people in boxing.
The other one is that one you did not give the answer for, but the most shocking scorecard. You said there's been quite a few before. We know the sport of boxing. Controversy is just a part of the thing. It goes hand in hand with boxing. When you talk about that aspect of it, and you get up there and you see a scorecard that you're pretty sure you know who won the fight, and then you read the scorecard and it's not quite the thing that you thought was going to happen, what goes through your mind?
I never want to see a fighter get robbed. I think that's the
Right.
worst thing is when a fighter clearly won a fight and they don't get the decision. I hate to see that. So, but at the same time, it can be a little bit fun being the bearer of bad news or the one that's going to break the news to all the fans because you're going to
Mhm.
shock everyone. So it's kind of fun to be the messenger of a shocking decision as well. But again, I never want to see a fighter lose when he should have won a fight.
Has there ever been a situation where you've been in the ring and there's obviously a situation like that where obviously a controversial outcome to say the least happens? And I know we've seen sometimes where the corners get a little bit heated about stuff happening. I know we saw one just a little bit ago, the TKV one got a little bit heated in there. But when you talk about those situations, has there ever been a weird, awkward situation after you've announced a scorecard in the ring?
Oh, absolutely. I've had a fighter. This is many years ago. He spit on my shoe. He got
Oh,
very
really?
mad. He was mad that I announced the other guy as the winner, and he actually spit on my tuxedo shoes. You
Really?
know, like that kind of stuff doesn't happen, very often.
Sure.
But I've had fans screaming and yelling at me when I step outside the ring. And I'm like, look, don't kill the messenger. I'm not one of the
Right.
judges. I'm just the ring announcer. But they always, sometimes they want to take out their frustrations on the guy who announced the decision. So I've
Mhm.
been in those situations a few times.
Absolutely. Well, Thomas, I've got one final question for you. It's the question I like wrapping up every single interview with, and it's talking about your legacy. Obviously, you still have potentially a lot more years on the table being a ring
Hope
announcer.
so.
But when
Hope
you,
so.
absolutely, but when you do decide to step away from being a ring announcer and move on from life in this aspect, what is it that you want to accomplish? What is it that you want to be remembered for what you've accomplished in your career?
Wow. Okay, man. Another tough question here, Zach. Um, well, first of all, I hope to ring announce until the wheels fall off. You
Okay.
know, working with Michael Buffer, he turned 80 in November, and he's still going strong. He still looks amazing. He's still
Right.
doing a great job in there, and I would like to just continue doing it as long as I can. And if I want to be remembered for anything, I just want to be remembered for a guy who was truly passionate about his job and did the best he could every event, whether there was 50 people out there or whether it was 95,000 people at a stadium. That
Mm.
guy gave it everything he had every time he had the opportunity with a microphone in his hand.
I love that. Well, Thomas, thank you so much for taking time to come on today. It's been a blessing and honor having you on here.
Well, thank you, Zach. It's been an absolute pleasure and honor. And best of luck to you with all your endeavors.
Appreciate it. Likewise with you. You're always welcome on as well, Thomas. Appreciate you
Thank you.
again.
Thank you.